Yep.
All right. Here with Curtis Fye.
Yep. How you doing?
Why don't you, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Curtis Fye. I am audio engineer and musician in Richmond. Born and raised in Richmond. Went to VCU, 98 to 2002. Moved up to Washington, D.C. for about 15 years or so, and then moved back to Richmond a couple years ago. And since I've been back, been doing a lot of recording and mixing and audio engineer type stuff at various studios in like kind of the Virginia area, but Space Bomb, Montrose, White Star, places like that. And playing as well. I'm a bass player, upright bass and electric bass mostly, and then, some other stuff too, but those are, if I'm playing gigs professionally, it's usually on bass. Wedding bands, jazz groups, things like that.
Oh, yeah. So could you tell us just a little bit about, how you got into music in general?
Yeah.
From childhood, I'm assuming, and just like your kind of journey into the music scene here in Richmond.
Yeah, definitely. I grew up, had a piano in the house as a kid, and it kind of sparked my interest in music. Started to tinker around on that. Eventually got into the string orchestra in middle school.
Nice.
So when I, signed up for electives in middle school, I decided to try strings. Signed up to play viola, but then accidentally got put in the wrong class, the cello bass class. And so instead of switching my schedule all around, I just decided to start playing bass, upright bass. And so that would have been about 10 years old. And just fell in love with it. And then quickly realized that the upright bass and the electric bass are very similar.
Mm-hmm.
So that got me into playing in bands and like mostly rock bands. This is like early 90s, so grunge is a thing, and grunge was,
awesome.
I was very into that. And eventually expanded to other types of music too, R&B and funk and all sorts of stuff. Met a bunch of cool people as I got older and went through high school who were also into music like me. And so we were trying all sorts of different stuff. And eventually, by the time I was going to graduate high school, decided to just keep on pursuing music. Went to VCU for jazz, 98, and graduated in 2002. Met all sorts of people there from all over the place, and who I still know to this day and still work with. And then from there, after I graduated, I spent a lot of time teaching and playing and a little bit of touring of a lot of places, the US, but also a few other countries too. Nice. Eventually, that led to, throughout this whole time, I'd kind of been dabbling in recording and stuff too, because when you're in a band, you want to make records, you want to record, and somebody in the band has to be the one who kind of gets into it a little bit. So that ended up being me, and was kind of learning a little bit on my own by recording bands that I was in or friends' bands and things like that. And eventually, after living up in DC for a little while, I decided that I wanted to like really focus on that. And so I went back to school up there at a place called Omega, which is like a trade school for audio engineering.
Wow.
Went there for a year, finished their program, and then started working in doing some live sound stuff and some studio stuff.
Sweet. And
then eventually landed working at Omega for a few years, recording, mixing, and but also teaching audio engineering too. So I got really deep into it there, and then moved back to Richmond, and continued to work in the studio. Reconnected with a lot of the people that I knew when I lived in Richmond before. A lot of the musicians, especially, a lot of them are still here making great music.
Yeah.
And the music family in Richmond has expanded too, so it's been good to come back, work with those people again, either playing with them, but also in this new kind of capacity as like an audio engineer and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Sweet. Yeah, it's very, very similar to my path. I started with the guitar, and then when it came time to pick electives, I was like, trumpet.
Oh, okay.
But then my dad said, why? Yeah. You might as well learn the bass. It's very, very similar.
Oh, okay.
So I played string orchestras,
sweet.
jazz bands,
awesome.
rock bands. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Sweet, man. So, yeah, we probably played a lot of the same music through our middle school, high school.
Awesome. Yeah. So I wanted to go back to the teaching at Omega.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about first how you realized you wanted to teach, and kind of your relationship with your students, and how I'm sure you had great relationships with your students. I'm sure that.
So yeah, I'd say so.
So could you talk a little bit about building relationships with the students in sort of a teaching fashion, and how you yourself grew as a musician by teaching?
Yeah. When I was at Omega, the teaching was all audio engineering stuff. So wasn't teaching any lessons or anything like that. I did that when I lived in Richmond before.
Yeah.
And I liked that. And but it's similar. At Omega, it's all audio engineering school. And that's also, when I went back to school for audio engineering, that's where I went.
Yeah.
And so I spent a year there. And when I went, I was already an adult. So I was kind of an outlier in the school in that I was 36 or 7, and most of the other students were in their early 20s.
Yeah.
And, I think it kind of made me, because I was paying for it out of my own pocket, and I was there to make a career change, and I was married, and I had like responsibilities. I took it as seriously as you could possibly take it.
Yeah, good.
And I think in doing so, all the teachers who were there and the administrators and everything recognized that, and were like, man, this guy is like really, doing well. He's crushing all the, the tests and all the stuff, and he's like going above and beyond. I did a lot of stuff. I kind of treated my time there as if I was almost auditioning for a job.
Yeah.
There,
Good.
Thinking like, well, when I finish, I've got to get some work. And this is one place that I might end up working.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't, that actually worked out. I finished there. I did some internships at other places too, but then Omega also kind of came calling, and they were like, hey, we actually need to hire somebody. Thankfully, I'd had previous teaching experience, which was a requirement from before I even went there. And so I slipped in.
Nice.
And the teaching of it was, the thing that I really got out of being the teacher. I just sat through the classes, and so as someone who's a little bit older, I could kind of recognize what was working and what wasn't working as far as when the teachers were teaching. I could see what was getting through to me, but also to the other students, and what wasn't. I kind of felt like I had this perspective of, it was so fresh on my mind being a student, that I could flip that over and use that as a teacher. And I could kind of put myself in the student's shoes. Yeah. Like, because I was just a student. Whereas some of the other teachers hadn't ever done that, hadn't been students there, or it had been such a long time. I'm not saying I was a better teacher than anybody else, but I feel like that was helpful to me, at least, to be able to do. And it also helped me bond, I think, with a lot of the students too. So that relationship, I was able to easily recognize, the looks on their faces when they were either like confused about something, or when something was like clicking, and it was like, great, like how to work with that, and it helped. And the cool thing about teaching at a place like that as a teacher for me was, everyone who was going to school there, it's the kind of thing you go to school for, not because you're like, well, I got to go to school for something, No one just thinks that and then picks audio engineering. They pick it because they already love something about it, or if nothing else, they just love music. And they want to do something with it, but they don't know what. Maybe they pick audio engineering, but a lot of times it's because the students are already kind of doing that on their own, which is so easy to do nowadays at home on your computer, to start to get into it. And when you want to actually know more, you want to know really not just like how to record a track, but like why you do certain things, and all of the whys of how recordings are made, and why we do certain things with different pieces of gear and microphones, stuff like that.
Sweet.
That's when you go to school, for audio engineering. And so just to have that shared passion or love,
I'm sure it makes it a lot easier to,
it does. And so especially, when the students come in who you could tell, are taking it as seriously. It's like I said, I had finished not too long before that, being a super serious student myself.
Mm-hmm.
So to see the ones who were coming through who were also, had that frame of mind was good. It was nice, and there was a nice bond formed there because I knew exactly where they were, like what they were thinking, and it was cool. And nothing's better than going to school for something, going to a class one day, learning a new microphone technique or a new thing about compression, and then immediately being excited to go home and use it. And there was a lot of that.
Sweet.
So it makes for a fun environment. Yeah,
Nice.
especially to be a teacher in.
Mm-hmm. So post Omega, you move back to Richmond.
Yeah.
How, within the music scene, how does your newly, I studied being an audio engineer, I taught being an audio engineer. How does your new mindset in terms of music translate to the Richmond music scene?
Yeah. Man, it translates.
And I guess how is it different than before when you were more of a gigging musician kind of?
Yeah. That's well, the beautiful thing was coming back. A lot of the musicians who I was playing with or working with in like a musician's capacity before I left Richmond are still kind of around, and a lot of them are, and a lot of them are like now. I'm getting to an age where like a lot of them have had kids who are also breaking into the music scene, but there's this family. Richmond is kind of a special place, and I feel like I can really say that now after moving away and coming back. I think it has to do with the size of the city.
Yeah.
It also has to do with the culture of the city, the schools, VCU, University of Richmond, Virginia Union, all the different schools we have in this area. There's like there's a good attitude in this city for people wanting to be creative, and not just in the music world, but like in the art world too. Just be creative and be supported by others. Like there's a lot of support here that I didn't feel necessarily in DC. Not for me personally, but just the vibe of like
Massive
bands
city,
supporting each other. There is that, of course, but not like here. Like here, it feels like everybody wants everybody else to do well. And that's great. That feels really good. So coming back, what actually brought me back was, I'd kind of been talking with Trey Pollard, who's part of Space Bomb. He and I have been friends for a long time, and mostly we've done a lot of playing together over the years. But at one point we were talking, and I was like kind of considering leaving DC again, and pretty much thinking either going to Richmond or, just doing some traveling for a little while. And he at the time was like, man, if you come back to, he knew that I had been doing Omega and was into audio engineering. He basically said, if you come back to Richmond, there's tons of work for someone like you, who not only are you a musician, but now you've got all these audio engineering skills and experience that, we need that, and so that brought me back. Just someone telling me, someone who is a big part of this music world in Richmond, to me at least, basically giving me the okay and like telling me like, if you come back, there's going to be work. Because as an audio engineer, if that's what you're trying to mainly do, you're not guaranteed to, you got to hustle. You got to look for work. You have to find the studios that need audio engineer workers. You got to find the musicians and the bands and like make connections and just try to, you can't just sit back and let everything come to you. You got to work for it. So to have that, especially because Trey's a big part of Space Mom, have someone who's a big part of a group in Richmond that's doing a lot of music and is a big part of the scene, has a hold on the scene a little bit, telling me like, if you come back, we'll have lots of work for you. And that was good. So that kind of gave me a little bit of like confidence and safety net, like, okay, cool, I can go back to Richmond. And then when I came back and reconnected with all these musicians that I knew before, and now kind of slowly over time, I've started working with them in the studio. I had great relationships with them already as musicians, so I think it helped them trust me to, like, okay, I'll book the studio and ask Curtis to be the engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And thankfully, most of those sessions have gone really well,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the outcome has been good. And so just that now, I think probably in town, whereas I used to be more, everyone knew me as a bass player. Now I think everyone knows me as like, oh yeah, he was a great bass player. I don't know what they think about my playing now. I haven't been playing as much as I was before, but now I think people are thinking of me as an audio engineer, and like a good choice. There's a lot of great audio engineers in studios, kind of in Richmond, and that's great. And everyone gets along. Like I said, everyone wants everybody else to be, to succeed. And so that's cool. And so I'm just one of a handful of people who are helping Richmond bands and musicians, and bands from outside of Richmond too are coming here to record some. But there's so much good music in Richmond that just to be one of the options for engineers who you can work with and make a cool recording.
Yeah.
It's good. So I've been welcomed back with open arms, and it feels good. It feels nice. It feels great. It's a cool feeling to be in the studio on the control room side of the glass, working with musicians that I still play with some, but used to play with all the time.
Mm-hmm.
There's a nice communication that we've already developed.
Yeah.
From just knowing each other and being musicians, and they can talk to me like a musician, which isn't always the case. The audio engineer often is a musician, but not always, and not always someone that they went to jazz school with.
Yeah.
So there's like a nice rapport already that I feel like I automatically have with a lot of musicians in this area, because of that. That makes it fun and easy to work with in the studio.
Nice.
Yeah. All right.
So let's talk a little bit about Space Bomb. Space Bomb is widely known in the Richmond music scene as kind of the hub. A big community has been built around Space Bomb, and I kind of want to see your perspective on it as someone who's more often in the control room than in the live room, and kind of just how you've seen the community grow around Space Bomb.
Cool. Yeah, man. So Space Bomb was formed way before I got back to Richmond, but a lot of the guys who formed it, Matt White, Trey Pollard, Cameron Ralston, and some people who I'm totally blanking on at the moment, Alan Parker, are guys that I've knew from, when I was my earlier time in Richmond. Mm-hmm. And it was cool as I was away, I was hearing and keeping in contact with some of these guys and hearing all the cool stuff they were doing. So it kind of started as a way for these guys who I consider great musicians, who were kind of finishing up VCU and playing music in Richmond, but also writing their own music. A lot of these guys went to school for jazz, but they were branching out. They were leaving jazz, using some of the jazz knowledge and all the stuff that they learned at school, but also to make all sorts of other types of music.
Yeah.
I feel like it's pretty diverse when it comes to the roster of records that Space Bomb made. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to have a way to start producing music with other people too.
Yeah.
And things grew over time. I can't talk too much about how they grew because I wasn't around. Mm-hmm. But when I came back to Richmond, there was a brand new studio, brand new building, kind of the hub where we are right now, actually. And they had already put out, I don't know how many, but a bunch of records with various people. Some of them were Space Bomb family guys like Matthew E. White. His first record was certainly out, and he had some other stuff in the works. Maybe he might have had a couple of collaborations out. The early Natalie Prass record had been out, and even I think she had a second album to come out, and a bunch of other stuff too. And so the name had kind of been built. There was some buzz, some like international press had been talking a little bit about Space Bomb, and lots of music had already been made. So by the time I came, we had this brand new studio. This was also kind of towards the end of COVID lockdown era.
Yeah.
Is when I came back to Richmond too. So things had kind of been quiet because of COVID
Mm-hmm.
for about a year, but they were opening back up. And that's kind of when I showed up in town. And as things were opening back up, we started to use the recording studio part of Space Bomb a little bit more and grow it and try to open it up not just to the Space Bomb family, but to anybody who wanted to use the studio. You know, when you have as you know, when you have a recording studio, you know, it's a big investment, not just initially, but like constantly. You're constantly investing in keeping it nice and keeping it updated and whether it's equipment and just paying the power bill. You know, power bills at studios are huge because everything, you know, takes so much power. So you know, you can't necessarily only use it for, you know, people who are on the Space Bomb record label. It has to be kind of opened up and used more regularly. And so that was the goal when I got back to town. And now it's thriving as that. The studio part of Space Bomb, the recording studio aspect is going strong.
Yeah.
At one point, Space Bomb kind of, I don't know, let's say a couple years ago, Space Bomb was more than just a recording studio, though. It was a kind of a record label, a management firm, so they managed artists too. They did publishing, so most of the artists on the label, and maybe some other artists who weren't on the record label itself, but had publishing deals through Space Bomb. And over time, you know, that reached its kind of peak, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. And now Space Bomb has sort of decided to focus mainly on production and recording, and less so on record label and management. So the managers who were working for Space Bomb have now started their own firms. And Brooks, who you met, this is one of them. The record label still exists, but it's mostly now, it's from what I understand, and again, like, you know, Matthew E. White would be able to tell us for real, like all the details, but it's mostly there to administer the albums that have already been put out. So they're not putting out as much music as they were at one point. Instead, they've got what they've put out over the years, and they're kind of administering how that goes. And so most of the focus at the moment is the recording studio itself and the production side of things. So Matt and there's a guy, Alex, who's walking by right there. That's Alex. Those two guys are here all the time, and sometimes they're working with artists that Matt is producing. And sometimes they're just working with artists who just want to book the studio. And then they're, you know, I'm on the roster of other engineers who comes in, either if it's a client that I've worked with before, and they want to book the studio, you know, then I will usually also work with them. Or if I happen to connect with the client outside of the Space Bomb world, and they want to make a record, they want to do some recording, then Space Bomb is usually the go-to for, let's try to book Space Bomb for however much time you have, and we'll go there and work. So it's these days Space Bomb has kind of become, like you said, it is the hub, especially for a lot of the Richmond area musicians and the music scene, to make recordings. Because the vibe is good. It feels good. It feels comfortable. Awesome. You know, it's there's tons of fun toys to play with, and the recording quality is good. And, so it's one of the main go-to spots, you know, in Richmond.
So how do you see, if at all, a difference between Space Bomb or, you know, Montrose or the other you know, kind of studios you worked with, in terms of, you know, not only community built around it, but kind of inside the studio? Seems like you guys are all, you know, close friends, and you know, do you see that in other studios, or do you see it more so or less so in Space Bomb?
I think you see it, but yeah, the vibe can be different. They're of the ones that I've most familiar with in Richmond, you know, they each have, so I would say the ones that I've worked at and can really speak on in Richmond would be Space Bomb, Montrose, and In Your Ear. and three pretty different vibes.
Yeah.
Yes. Just, I mean, even just walking in the door, you know, you get a sense for it. In Your Ear has been around forever. I mean, you know, they've been here the longest in Richmond. Super pro, super kind of business-like, great for clients who want to come in and they have like a, you know, an agenda and they have something that needs to get done, and they can go in and they can, you know, everything is very professional, and in a great way.
Yeah.
None of these studios I'm going to talk bad about, because they're all great in their own way. And the cool thing is, you know, different artists, different musicians, and it's not always musicians. Sometimes it's, you know, it might be the Martin Agency has a, you know, an advertising campaign and they just need some voiceover work or something like that. But any type of audio recording and mixing and mastering depending on the project, you know, it might be great to go to In Your Ear, you know, because it's that kind of project. It needs that kind of attention, and they've got specialties over there. The engineers who work there have been doing it for probably, I mean, maybe even longer, definitely longer than you've been alive. But
You would do it for longer than I've been alive.
Maybe, yeah, actually. You know, they've been around for a long time. They've done a lot of stuff, so yeah, In Your Ear, I think of when I think of like businesses need something done, you know, and they go to In Your Ear. It's super professional, and they've got their stuff together. Space Bomb is a little more relaxed, a little more vibey to me, but still very clean and kind of orderly, and like, we're down to get stuff done, but you know, there might be a beer, you know, a beer floating around, and we get, you know, things are less kind of regimented. But the vibe is good. The aesthetic, the look of the studio is a little younger, maybe a little funkier, a little more kind of just relaxing. But the gear is great. The people who work here, but a little bit younger, you know, so the mentality and the, like, maybe the music that people are interested in, you know, the people who work here are interested in, or the people that want to come here and record might be a little younger, maybe a little fresher. And then Montrose is kind of like this too. I think Montrose and Space Bomb are similar. Montrose is a little, it's almost like Space Bomb dark in a way.
Space
like,
Bomb dark.
Yeah, like when you walk into Montrose, it's like, oh yeah. I mean, the vibe is kind of similar, but it's a little darker. It's a little moodier. There's a ton of gear. I mean, you know, Space Bomb has a lot of gear, but Montrose has even more gear. It's all great gear. It's all, you know, both of those two places are really into kind of classic stuff that most of the gear is very old, but stuff that everyone has been using forever and for a reason, you know. But good stuff. But yeah, Montrose, it's got a similar vibe. In fact, Space Bomb, this studio that Space Bomb is in now, was co-designed and co-built by the same guy who owned Montrose for a long time. So they have similar vibes, because they kind of come from, at least partially from, the same brain. But yeah, Montrose, it's laid out differently. It's even, I know it's got a funky shape to it. You know, the lighting is a little darker and moodier, but it feels great too. You know, it's really cool. I've been working there a little more over the past year than before, and it's awesome. I love it. Yeah, I just worked there a couple days ago on a little jazz recording. They went really well. And the other thing that I'll also mention is that, you know, when it comes to instruments and, you know, some toys, but also kind of big instruments like pianos, the different studios have different pianos, different types of gear. And so there are times when if I'm working with a client and we really want to record piano, but we need like a really great sounding grand piano sound. Well, Space Bomb doesn't currently have that. They have a great upright piano, and it sounds really good, but they don't have a grand piano at the moment. In Your Ear does have a grand piano. And it's of one brand. If you're a piano player, you know, the brand and the feel of it and the sound of it are super important.
Yeah,
you don't get to bring your own piano to the recording session. You have to play what they have.
Yeah.
So finding the place that has the one that feels best and sounds best to you is important. Montrose has an awesome piano.
Yeah.
You know, it's a piano that most piano players love to play. You know, or would be happy playing and recording on.
So in terms of the need for equipment, is there a lot of intercommunication between, or like, you know, say you're recording at Space Fountain and you think, I need a grand piano, like, can you call up Montrose and say, hey, can I stop by and use your piano real quick?
Yeah. It might not be quite that easy, but it would definitely just be a quick text or a call. You know, let's find some free time in the next whatever, you know, and get in because it's important. Yeah.
So do you think that the different vibes of the three that you mentioned, do you think that they attract different kinds of musicians?
I think so.
You think so?
Yeah.
So there'd be a different kind of community around each thing based on the vibe of the space, which is really interesting.
For sure.
Because you think, you know, bright lights, you know, happier people maybe, or, you know, funkier, younger crowd.
Right.
Whereas In Your Ear, or Montrose, say, same thing, but a little darker, you'd think. Yeah, for
sure. I mean, it's every musician, you know, every person in the world is different, but you know, than everybody else. But musicians, when you're making a recording, there's so many like aspects of making a recording that need to be right for it to come out the way that the artist wants it to be.
Yeah.
You know, the artist has to be ready. They have to have the songs together. You know, they have to have the right equipment. But one of the big ones that sometimes does get overlooked is the vibe of the place that you're making a recording.
Yes.
You know, you have to be able to go in and feel comfortable, and different people's personalities and temperaments are going to want different things. You know, so some people are going to want to go to In Your Ear, where everything is super professional, everything looks brand new and clean and in order, and that's going to make them comfortable when they walk in, and they're going to walk in feeling comfortable, and that's going to lead to a better performance and a better recording. Some people need to walk into Space Bomb, where the vibe is a little funkier, and you know, it lines up more with what makes them feel comfortable. You know, so everybody finds a different, you know, just like in anybody's home, if you walk into a bunch of different homes, everyone decorates a little different, everyone has different furniture. It's kind of that, you know, so it could be just the look, it could be the smell, you know, it could be the lighting,
the music that's playing,
the music that's playing when you walk in. All those things kind of, I think, play into what the studio attracts. And studio, you know, I'm not really a studio owner, but I do know from talking with different studio owners is that they think about that too. You know, they think about the clients that they want, and that could just be because they think that's where the money is. Probably more so it's because that's the type of client that they would prefer to work with. And so they design their studios and everything down to the lighting and the, you know, what's hanging on the walls to reflect that and try to attract those people. So yeah, definitely, for sure, different communities in the different studios. That being said, Richmond's such a small town, and I feel like the music world is so in tune and in touch with, you know, all aspects. So you've got jazz people hanging out with rock people and country people and hip hop people, and there's a lot of crossover that I know for a fact that there are you know, musicians who are making records at all three of those studios, and other ones. There's other ones in the city that I didn't even mention that are also great, and it's not always, you know, it's not, you know, musicians aren't loyal to one. You know, it could be depending on the project. You know, this specific project might, you know, they might, especially if they've recorded at multiple studios in the area, and so they have experience. They might think that this project they're working on would be best at The Sound of Music, you know, and then, 6 months down the road on the next album, they might think, oh, you know what, this time I feel like this one and this particular group is going to do better at Space Bombs than Space Bomb. So there's a lot of that too, And again, I think that's the kind of thing that I feel like in some other places in other cities, there might be more competition, whether it's the studios kind of trying to swoop in and, gather as many clients as they possibly can, or do what they can to, get the business. Whereas here in Richmond, it does seem like everybody wants to do well, but everyone's supportive and everybody wants everybody else to do well. So there's a guy, I'll just mention him because I haven't mentioned it yet. Minimum Wage is a studio that's been in Richmond since, I don't know, probably at least since the late 90s or so. And Lance, he owns it, runs it, and he's been doing recordings in Richmond, I mean, at least since the late 90s, maybe even before that. But that's kind of when I met him and did some work there as a musician. He's been so massive for the music scene in Richmond, because his prices are lower. It's his place. He lives above the studio. Like he's figured out a way to make this really great studio affordable for. Back when I was working there a bunch, I was a student. At DCU, I didn't have much money, and the people that I was recording with didn't have much, so he was kind of the only option. But thankfully, he's a great option, because he's awesome, and the studio's awesome, and he's still doing it. I don't know how many amazing records he's been a part of since then, but that's still another great place in town. That
and that kind of builds its own little community. That's someone who's facilitating it. That's someone who's building it from the ground up, taking people that can't fully access the music scene and giving them a spot to.
Which is brilliant, because those same people are gonna get older. They're gonna keep playing music. A lot of them. They're gonna keep having bands. And they're gonna keep needing recordings. And when you form that early relationship, and it's a good relationship, it leads to future work and stuff too. So. But Lance is awesome. I mean, there's plenty of times when, plenty of projects that I've worked on where part of the record was recorded at Minimum Wage. And then they come to Space Bomb or Montrose to do something that couldn't be done at Minimum Wage. Because Minimum Wage is a little bit on the smaller side. You couldn't fit a string orchestra in there. But we do string orchestra stuff at Space Bomb all the time. Awesome. So it might be the rhythm section was recorded at Minimum Wage, and the strings were recorded at Space Bomb, things like that, and it's great. It's really cool.
Last question: as the engineer, the man behind the glass, do you're often the guy that's facilitating a recording session. Do you find in the same way that a studio's vibe should complement the artist that's recording? Do you find that you kind of change the way that you interact with musicians based on who you're working with, so that you can make it as comfortable for them as possible, or get the best out of them?
I think so, at least to a certain extent. That, and personally, I don't know if all engineers do this, but I could just speak for myself. That's kind of a part of my personality anyway, is to do that, even in social situations. It's like slightly change. I don't know what you call that. There's got to be a name for it. But
social
chameleon in a way, to just, get along and make the situation that you're in pleasant. In the studio, it happens a lot. And thankfully, it doesn't have to happen too much. I don't have to become a totally different person. But the other day I worked with a young high school senior, and his dad were the ones who were basically coming in to make an audition recording for colleges. And so, like, the way I'm going to interact with them is going to be slightly different than if I'm interacting with a blues musician who's 65 years old and comes in and is smoking and has a totally different personality. And bands, all bands are different. The dynamic in a band is kind of can be complicated, and so just trying to find the way to my goal, and I think a lot of engineers' goal, is you're kind of like on the outside looking in at a band who's trying to be creative and work and get
literally you're in the control room.
Exactly. I'm looking through the glass watching. But a lot of times you're not really a fly on the wall. You're part of it.
Yeah.
And you do have to like kind of be involved, but you're trying to figure out like how to do that and just keep everybody comfortable and keep everybody in a creative space, not worrying. It's so easy in the studio to get in your own head if you're the performer, and next thing you know, you just can't get the thing right. You can't get that guitar part right, or you can't sing the way you want to because you're thinking too much. And so whatever I can do to keep that from happening, if it means that I need to be like overly supportive, sometimes that's the case. I have to keep saying encouraging things, and like try to make it seem like I'm not doing it on purpose. And sometimes it just means not saying anything, just being a very kind of silent observer and, only chiming in occasionally, but trying to be super like almost as if I'm not there, letting them not worry about me at all. And just, sometimes that's the better technique. So yeah, it does. I think it does that. I think since that's such a big part of getting good recordings is having comfortable artists, then the engineer has to be aware of that and whatever they can do to keep the artist comfortable. Yeah, it's important. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I think we're done here.
Okay. Thanks,
Thank
man.
you so much.
Yeah, let's shake hands.